I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. Today on EdCast, we have the special opportunity to look at education through the lens of someone who has spent decades on the inside as a teacher, scholar, lawyer, and media commentator. David C. Bloomfield is retiring after many years as a professor at Brooklyn College, while continuing as a trusted media voice on education issues and policies. He'll share his long perspective as we talk about the changes he's witnessed, the debates that have shaped the field, progress made, questions that need answering, and what lies ahead for education. Now on EdCast. Joining me today is David C. Bloomfield, Professor of Education Leadership, Law and Policy at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center. David began his career in education after graduating from Brandeis University with elementary and secondary teaching certificates. He later attended law and graduate school and then worked in private practice, specializing in school desegregation and representing the Board of Education in special education litigation. He later served as the board's general counsel and as general counsel senior education advisor to then Manhattan Borough President Ruth Messinger. From 2001 to 2005, he was an elected parent member and president of the Citywide Council of High Schools. David Bloomfield is a sought-out media commentator. He has appeared in Education Week, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Daily Beast, Politico, the New York Post, WPIX, Fox 5 New York, WNET, and other news outlets. David, thank you so much for joining me today on EdCast. As I said in my opening, you're stepping away from your academic role in Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center after many years. And having read your bio, I see you've had an interesting career path. And like many other people, it was not a straightforward one. So could you tell us a little bit about your career path and what made you make some of those turns along the way? How did you know to make a turn? Just let's go back and look over the career.
Well, are you including flunking organic chemistry?
Definitely.
When I was at Brandeis?
When you probably wanted to be a chemistry major.
Right. So pre-med, of course,
Okay.
my first semester, and that didn't go well. And I said, what do I really want to do? My father had been a doctor, and at Brandeis, it was pre-med was a thing. But I had been a Head Start volunteer in high school. And I remembered that I just loved being with these little kids. I loved the feel, the smell, everything about it. And I said, I want to become an elementary school teacher, which of course upset my father and upset Brandeis University. It was something that you could do right out of college and not go to graduate school. And I actually then applied for a junior year abroad in the 1970s, the early 70s wasn't a thing. But I wrote letters to schools in the UK saying I would like to study education. And I went to the University of Cardiff, Wales for a year, again, sort of off the track, but I reassured everybody that I was going to be studying. And it was a wonderful year, changed my life, immersed myself in education and a whole new way of thinking about education. They don't have first grade, second grade, third grade. And so I learned about a new system and a new way to think. And then I left Brandeis having written an honors thesis about the Carnegie Corporation's education program during the 1960s. I taught in a private school for 4 years. I went to West Africa to write a curriculum on African ethnic groups. And so from there, it was, for me, a straight shot.
But law school comes into that. How does law school come into that? So not so straight.
Well,
how does law school come into that?
Law school comes in because when I was at Brandeis, I worked as an intern for the mayor of Boston during the busing crisis.
Oh, I remember that.
And so really in my career, the way I kind of sum it up, there's always been an instructional side and there's always been a political side.
Interesting.
When I was a teacher, it was a private school, I organized the teachers into a chapter of the UFT. Law school was emanated really from that political interest. I had organized this union, but I had no idea about what to do about our contract. I was so frustrated, and so off to Columbia Law School and Princeton University for an MPA
So
to
then you're
study education.
working for the Board of Ed then, and you're representing the Board of Ed. So how did you go from that law career back to being a professor at Brooklyn College?
So I worked for the Board of Ed. I worked for Ruth Messenger in that political environment, which was very interesting. I went to the New York City Partnership, and they fired me. So we were talking earlier about no career is a straight shot, ups and downs. That was a down. Looking for a job, and I heard there was a job teaching education law at Teachers College. And I had hung out with the professor of education law at Teachers College while I was at law school, because nobody at Columbia Law School was really interested in education law. And that's why I went to law school. I took over Ed's classes when he retired, and I never really wanted to be
Ed who, I'm sorry.
Ed Reuter
Oh, Ed
was
Reuter,
his name.
yeah, yeah.
And so I never really wanted to be just an education law professor. I wanted to be a professor of education, also teaching education law. And that's what Brooklyn College gave me the opportunity to do. And so I've been very happy for 26 years
See that.
at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Grad Center, teaching education law, but also supervising students in the field in education leadership, being program head of education leadership at Brooklyn College. And so I've just had a wonderful time at CUNY
Right.
in that the varied career that it's given me the opportunity to pursue.
How did you then become, while you're doing this concurrently, a political commentator?
I don't know, I got a big mouth. So I really felt that it's an obligation of college faculty, particularly I think in education, to speak about what's going on in the schools, whether it's criticism or reflection. And so I started to, I think probably mostly for Chalkbeat in the early 90s, maybe early 2000s. And from
So you wrote
there,
for them?
it just spread. I've never been a staff member. I've always insisted on keeping my independence. And so simply as a commentator, and then other press, I guess, were reading what I was writing. And so here we are today.
Is there ever a time when people have asked you for a comment, to comment on something, when you've said no comment, that you wanted to stay away from it?
Oh, I often don't comment when it's not in my lane.
Okay.
So if I know something about it, I feel free to comment. But I'm not an instructor, an instructional specialist. So very
Right.
often, if something comes up that's instructional or
Pedagogical.
or requiring statistical analysis above my grade, then I'll wave off and often recommend somebody else.
Good. Perfect. Okay, now I'm going to read you a quote. Since, as I've said, you've been an education insider for a long time. So Angela Ramirez, Dr. Angela Ramirez, who is a policy analyst at the Center for Public School Excellence, has said, talking about the current time, America's public schools are dealing with a perfect storm of academic, financial, and social challenges. Do you agree with her?
I agree with her, but it's always dealing with a perfect storm. I mean, there I
okay.
was in Boston during the desegregation situation. When Reagan was the president, he came out with a nation at risk. So we always seem to be on the precipice, and we always seem to muddle through.
Right. So let me ask you then, in the long time that you've been in education, what looks different to you about education? And let's go from K through 12, even higher ed, than from when you first began teaching.
I think the biggest change was in New York City when Bloomberg became the mayor and we got mayoral control and the system became highly data driven. That would be his phrase. It's everybody's phrase. We're now testing. It was an era of No Child Left Behind. We still have this annual testing. I was just reading an article about how students aren't reading books because they're reading excerpts to answer a multiple choice question. And so I think that the greatest change has been from a more holistic educational environment to a much more test-driven environment.
And there are some controversial articles, some studies that say the backing off of testing has led to not such good results. And there's a lot of controversy about that particular study that was just talked about going away from testing maybe hasn't been so good. This is going to go back and forth. So let's take a look going back. Let's say 2000, the time of the, what are some of the major trends you've seen in, let's say, the last 20, 25 years that you think have affected education the most?
I think education has become more politicized in terms of
Yes.
partisan politics. Education used to be pretty much on the back burner. People were concerned, but it was a local concern. When George W. Bush came in, I noted that Rod Page, his Secretary of Education, just passed away at age 92. But Bush ran on an education platform, worrying about the soft racism of I forget what the rest of the phrase was, and so I think during that time we've become much more politicized in terms of educational policy.
Do you see anything else that has really been very different from way back when?
Well, of course, I think we've moved away in a good way from the canon. There's much more interest in inclusion. Not only in terms of the curriculum, but in terms of students and making sure that students succeed, whether they're low income, whether they have handicapping conditions, whether they're English language learners. And so I think that that's been a very positive change over the course of my career.
Are you worried that that's going to be rolled back a lot now that the Trump administration seems so anti all of those principles and goals?
I'm worried, but I'm not panicked. I really think that good genie is out of the bottle. That we can't go back to a situation which is only going to be include kids who are going on to college, a canon that is more Charles Dickens than it is Toni Morrison. So I think some people are worried and overcautious, and I hope we don't lose that enthusiasm for real education and student interest rather than what now is being called a classical education.
I hope you're right. Let's go back to some positive things then. Where do you feel we've made the greatest progress in education over the past 2 decades or so?
As I said, I think we're much more concerned about all students. There are legal rights that are involved. There's also a political movement for inclusion. So I think that in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the students that we're attending to, we're much more involved with everybody succeeding as much as possible rather than just those college-bound kids.
And we'll look to see if this new approach to reading, the new old approach to reading, the science of reading is going to have the desired effect. I'm not losing sight of your earlier comment about students reading excerpts and the lack of students' ability to read. We could have begun with the NAEP scores being at an all-time low in 2024.
I'm almost more concerned about writing than I am about reading. I think
they're very interconnected.
Right, but I don't think that writing is getting enough of attention, and they are so interconnected.
They are.
But teachers don't have the time to read a long and grade a long essay, let alone assign the books that the essay ought to be about.
Well, maybe we can not focus on ChatGPT writing everybody's essay, so I'm going to let that go for now, okay? We may get to it again. What challenges remain the most stubborn to you? I mean, I have my own thing in my own head, but what challenges do you see as really the most difficult?
I think the continuing crisis of racism in our country, the gerrymandering of tiny little school districts, and the use of property taxes to fund schools so that we have wealthier and poorer school districts, often along racial lines. We have school districts which are being created to secede from larger districts. So I think racism permeates everything in the United States, and something that we have to continue to confront. And we're now seeing the pushback, but
We are.
I believe that there will be continued progress in that direction.
I really hope that you are correct, because that is where we're seeing the greatest pushback from the current administration. The idea, again, of course, we now have absenteeism, which I think has been a really tough thing to get on top of. Are you concerned about the achievement gap being, or the opportunity gap, however we want to phrase it, not moving that much either?
I'm concerned about it, as I just said, but also how the pandemic has exacerbated that issue, and we're still climbing out of the pandemic. Opportunity loss, really, I don't think so much learning loss, but that has to do with socialization of students, as well as making sure that we go back to a situation where students are really engaged in learning in person. I think remote instruction is still a threat, and I mean it as a threat. But I hope that we really engage kids in a way that we kind of lost during that era.
So when we look at the dismantling of the Department of Education, so I've been reading a lot about that, and they are farming out certain responsibilities that were the departments to the labor department, to treasury, whatever. Some people say we should panic, and some people say, it's not that significant. What do you think?
I think it's less significant in terms of the nuts and bolts than it is the message that they're sending. I think it is devastating in terms of federal policy toward education, but federal policy toward education really isn't that important in the scheme of things. It's state education departments, it's local school districts, but the message that the Trump administration is sending, that education really isn't important as an attitude. It should be directed at job creation rather than life creation. I think that we're in trouble if the American public buys that message.
And that is the higher ed message now, all the way. Career preparation and academic preparation really taking a back seat. And so let's go local now to New York City. New York City has a new mayor. He has not said too much yet about education, but now that we're looking, he will be able to select a chancellor soon. When you think of all the chancellors you've seen come and go, who stands in your mind as the most effective one? Not you didn't have to like the person, but who did you think was the most effective chancellor?
Well, I think there's a consensus that maybe Frank Macchiarola under Ed Koch was the most effective.
He was popular too.
Right, but my real favorite was Ramon Cortines. Ramon Cortines, who came in from California, so it was quite interesting that we had this outsider. But I really thought that he had the kind of spirit and the intention that we needed. But of course, he battled with Rudy Giuliani and left before he could accomplish that much.
Do you have a choice in mind if you were selecting the next school's chancellor who you'd like to see have the job?
I don't have a person in mind. I think it would be a good thing for Mamdani to keep Melissa Ramos as the chancellor for now, at least through the school year. He hasn't said a lot about his educational priorities, except that he doesn't want mayoral control. So, but in not wanting mayoral control, the law requires that he appoint the chancellor. So I would suggest let's have some continuity for now, work out through the school year. His appointees to the PEP, the Board of Education, don't take office until June anyway, because the current members have terms. So I would say without an urgent message about education, he should take time, survey the field, and choose somebody who he can work with and delegate responsibility to, so that he's not running education out of City Hall, but out of Central, and more importantly, out of the districts and the schools.
Now, what do you think of this idea of relinquishing mayoral control? Nobody ever gives up control over anything. So here's a mayor-elect who says, I'm thinking of giving it up. I don't know that he said 100%, but what do you think of that? Is that a good idea? I mean, people weren't so thrilled when everything was localized. I mean, there were a lot of things wrong. What do you think?
I have always believed that giving the mayor the authority to delegate powers throughout the system made a lot of sense. We are one city. The mayor, after all, sets the city budget, of which the largest portion is education. He does the collective bargaining agreements with all the unions. So that's as much mayoral control outside of the statute as anything else. Then I think it's really important to understand what are citywide responsibilities and what are better things left to the individual school districts or even the schools. I believe, for example, that the reading curriculum that's been imposed on the schools out of Central would be better left to principals who really are the instructional leaders of their schools. What David Banks did was to say the superintendents would choose from a list of 3 approved curricula. Why not give that to principals? Pick one of the 3, or if you're doing something else, do that and check in with us. You know, we're accountable. Make sure that it's a good curriculum. But I think principals should be giving more power. School communities, parents, teachers should have more power in terms of that day-to-day instructional mission.
Some schools have gotten exemptions from the reading program. They've had their own.
Few.
Too few. Okay, so his priorities. The mayor has not yet said what they will be. What do you think they should be?
Well, integration is important, and he's even talked about that. And in fact, one of the main effects of his idea about not having kindergarten gifted and talented programs, I think, has an integrative effect. We're not going to be taking these kids out of the system and moving them into specialized, segregated situations. They're going to be part of the group. And I think that that's really important. And it's that kind of idea, I think, that should animate most of his policies. An inclusive policy, one that is interested in educating all children and not just a small group of children.
I think identifying G&T students, I mean, I think I do agree with him, starting in kindergarten, although I know kids take those tests, some of them, you know, very early on, but I think he's right to try to push that back. I do think that there are gifted children cognitively, and I think they should have some special programs for them, but I think it's identifying them and getting them into the programs, I think, has really been the problem.
Also, the program is kind of specious. I mean, there's a sibling preference in
the DOE as well.
Yeah,
I know that
for gifted and talented, because we don't want to have parents having 3 kids in 3 different schools.
Some of the private schools do that, certainly.
But it doesn't make sense if it's truly a gifted and talented program.
Well, that does not make sense at all. Okay, let's go continue. We're running out of time, they're telling me. So what issues in education do you think people consistently misunderstand?
I think that they misunderstand the life of a classroom. When the Supreme Court just made a decision, it's called the Mahmoud case, where people with particular religious beliefs can take their children out of a lesson because they object to the message of that lesson in opposition to their religion. Well, that's not the way a classroom really works. The classroom is a quite spontaneous, dynamic place. It's very hard to tell parents everything that may be happening on a given day in the classroom. And the idea that a parent has to receive notice of what the curriculum is going to be so that they can pull their kid out, I mean, it's just a terrible, senseless idea in terms of the life of a classroom. It may make sense to a Supreme Court justice, but it doesn't make sense to teachers, to kids, and even parents.
Do you also think they misunderstand DEI? I mean, there was so much misunderstanding about critical race theory, but I mean, the whole conversation about DEI, I think, got away from
Right. Well,
what people were trying to really accomplish there.
I think what people also don't understand, I talked about the politicization
Right,
of
that's
education.
part of it.
You know, almost everything that comes out of a politician's mouth is politically driven and not, it's about more PR in the headline than it is about what's really going on in the classroom. And so, you know, I really distrust. I don't even like the fact that Hochul came up with the cell phone ban. I think it's for school districts, for schools to decide what's right for them. The reason she did it was for votes, not necessarily for the best interests of the children. It may be a good thing.
Yeah, there have been some positive reports already.
Why should, I mean, even the state education department was upset about it because it took an educational policy away from them. They could have regulated it if they felt like they should, rather than having it come out of the political process.
Australia just banned social media for kids under 16, which is a big move that I can never see happen here. Maybe
beware what comes out of the mouth of politicians when it comes to
You don't think they're going to do it?
Well, they're doing it.
They're doing it. All right. We are running out of time. So I have two key questions. One is higher education worth it? Is it still worth it to get a college degree with going to higher ed quick?
Well, so before I said it, I stayed in my lane, and my lane is basically pre-K through 12.
Right,
but I'll take a flyer for you. And of course, I believe that higher education is so important in a macro sense, but also in an economic sense. You know, it's okay for Bill Gates to drop out of Harvard, but by and large, we know that high school completion, college completion is the route to prosperity.
And what are you going to miss the most not being on campus anymore?
We talked about instruction and politics. I think I'm going to miss both of them. I love my students, my old second grade students and my doctoral students and the whole range. That's the most fun, of course. But also, and I intend to, if I'm not teaching, I still will be politically involved in education.
Well, we are completely out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. You have had an illustrative career, a model of a career for all of us to really emulate what you've done, your engagement with both academics, the outside world, and the effect that you've had. So I want to congratulate you and wish you all the best. I know that you will still be a commentator and you're not leaving the field, so I hope we will see you again, but I do want to wish you all the best. Thank you so much for joining us today, David C. Bloomfield. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Thanks for watching. We wish you all a happy and fulfilling 2026, and we will see you soon.
To hear from you, please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.